Hello, I'm Frank Epstein, founder and president of Collage New Music. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our latest online presentation entitled The Composer Speaks. The Composer Speaks is an opportunity to introduce composers directly to you. Our guest composer today is Yu-Hui Chang. A native of Taiwan, Yu-Hui enjoyed early training in piano, voice, and music theory, all by the age of 6. She started composing at age 14 and came to the United States in 1994. She received her Master's of Music degree from Boston University and then completed her Doctorate of Musical Arts at Brandeis University, where in 2006 she became a member of the faculty. Her music is energetic, precise, ingenious, along with vibrant colors and ingenious effects. As a former co-director of our local Dinosaur Annex Music Ensemble, she's curated over 70 concerts. It is now my pleasure to introduce our music director, David Hoose, who will in turn introduce Yu-Hui Chang. We thank you all for joining us, and we hope this experience will bring you closer to new music and the composers that write it.
Yu-Hui, it's a great pleasure to see you. I hope you're doing well, or at least as well as can be expected during these very weird times. I understand that you have been back in Taiwan, where you were born, for about a month. Is this the first time you've been back since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yes, I had to be there for 6 weeks because I had to stay in a quarantine hotel for 15 days.
And what was that like?
It wasn't too bad. I was able to find a hotel myself, and it was really nice. Actually, it was nice that because the hotel did a very good job of keeping people comfortable, and the meals were great. I post some photos of my meals on social media, and people were saying, "Oh, you're eating better than I do." And then I also had a very large window, which was a must. And so that window kept me sane. Even my family, within just a couple hours of my arrival, they walked by the window, wave at me from afar.
Yes,
right. And then so I was on the 7th floor, so they looked tiny, but that really helped.
So, can I swing you way back now? As we said, you were born in Taiwan, and you began studying piano and, as I understand it, voice when you were quite young. Studying voice when, I don't know how young you were when you started studying voice.
I wanted to be a singer really early on. I wanted to be a coloratura soprano. And I was in this music program since I was first grade, second grade. We all had to play piano. Everybody had to play piano. You have lesson every week. You have jury every semester. On top of that, when you're 4th grade, you're supposed to pick a second instrument. And I wanted to do voice, but they say you haven't gone through puberty yet. We don't want to give you voice lesson. So I was kind of dabbling with violin for a few years. And when I went to middle school, finally I formally started to have voice lesson. But when I was in elementary school, I was in a couple different children's choirs. So singing has always been pretty natural to me.
Well, I haven't had the pleasure of hearing you sing, but people I really trust and respect a lot say that to hear you sing a Schubert song is just a supreme experience. Are you still singing?
I don't really sing anymore. The last time I think I performed in public was probably the year when I was in Radcliffe. And somehow at the end of the fellowship, we all have to show what we did. And then so I was a composer. I played some of the music, but I also sang a couple songs, and pianist Don Berman played the piano for me. So if you want to ask him what he thinks, I think he could tell you.
No, I don't need to ask Don, but I understand that you're a superb leader singer and also a wonderful pianist. So you could have continued along either of those paths, and certainly your desire was to be a singer. Now, how did you ever begin thinking about composing music?
Well, I mean, in the music program that I mentioned earlier, I mean, composing is already part of the education. So in the music theory class, we all have to compose, and I think my first one that I can believe that's a more complete thing was a piano piece that I wrote when I was 8 years old. I can still remember something about some kind of storm in the desert. So I can still remember how the opening started. And then pretty much continuously, and then sometimes basically at that time you compose what you hear, what you have been hearing. And so sometimes it will sound very fantasy-like, sometimes it sound like Satie-like, sometimes sound like early, neoclassical, and sometimes sounds like Mozart. So it's kind of all over the places, right? And because that's how early composing was like. But I didn't start formally declare composition is my major until I was in high school.
So help me understand, is this an arts school in Taiwan, or is this the kind of education that every young person would get in some form, fashion or another?
They call it the special music talented program. So it's sort of kind of built in a regular elementary school, middle school, and high school. So not every school has this. Most of people have regular just music class. But in specific schools, they have these programs. So they have one class for each year. They have selected students to do this. So the curriculum, they'll include all the other academic courses, but on top of that, there will be 2 instruments you have to learn: music theory, orchestra, chorus. Sometimes they have supplementary music history class. So that's what we have to do, throughout. And that I was in that kind of program all the way until I went to college.
You said your first pieces were influenced by all manner of things that you were hearing, and we know those storm pieces that children write, and ones that are affected that sound like Rachmaninoff and sound like newer Satie, as you say. And how much of Eastern music influenced you then? Do you think it was also part of the language that was coming into your musical thinking?
Mm-hmm. Right. I think this kind of cultural DNA is something that I've been thinking about since I was high school or college, because at the time I would think about, especially when I listen to all these great composers from the US, from Europe, and you wonder, I'm a little me in Taiwan, and I'm using the same instruments, learning the same theories. Why does this world need me? What can I bring into the music world? So this kind of cultural identity is an issue that I had to think about. And I believe my teachers in Taiwan and my colleagues at the time, they were all thinking about it. Everyone had a different take about it. How do they, since we practice mostly on the Western mediums, how do we justify it? How do we make sense of that? Do we completely ignore our own cultural heritage? And so some people, they would do like East blends West, this kind of approach and things like that. And what kind of, I mean, I think people in general do recognize the richness of our own cultural heritage. Right. I think in general, but the thing is how far you go and what you do with it. I think everyone has a different approach. I remember when I was in high school, there was a Taiwanese composer who just returned from Germany and had a pretty successful career there. And he wrote something really, really avant-garde. And
in the Germanic sense, you mean?
Right.
Like the Stockhausen sense or something.
Exactly. I mean, think about Germany in 70s and 80s, right. That kind of sound. And so you couldn't, even though the title seems like have some kind of traditional titles like Bagua or I Ching, that kind of stuff, but the sound in itself, it just doesn't not sound like, you know, in the most superficial and cliche way. There's no pentatonic, there's no certain kind of flow or some kind of empty spaces. And he just simply said, what traditional music? I am traditional music. Basically, tradition is not, so it's going to make me think about, okay, what does it mean by saying that? So it really affect the way I look at tradition, because a lot of time we look at tradition as museum piece, but we can also see tradition is me. I'm the future tradition. So I write whatever I like based on whoever I am, and I'm the tradition. So that's
I like that.
So that's what it means. So tradition is not you have to be a certain type. You have to carry a certain element. So the tradition is really much a true tradition. It shouldn't be artificial or something in the museum, but it's really a true reflection of me. And I'm already a blend myself, right? And then so all I need to do is to honestly, truthfully reflect who I am, what I know, what I hear. So that's, and for some time you were asking whether or not I was, you know, in the music, what you hear have different elements, whether or not that was deliberate. I think when I was in college, I would remember in my freshman year, I was thinking about it a lot. Especially when I was when I just went to college. At that time, I was writing more like Hindemith type of writing. You know, I moved on from Debussy to Hindemith and, you know, Rachmaninoff, all the stuff. And that was really sort of kind of early 20th century phase. I moved on from Mozart and all the way, finally, when I went to college, that's where I was. And then all of a sudden, my teacher was forcing me into the mid-20th century avant-garde, European avant-garde.
And this was in Taiwan, right?
Yeah, this was in Taiwan.
Okay.
And so basically the first half of 20th century was largely missing. And I had to be sort of kind of, the teacher had a very clear expectation that that's the direction I should go. And so I listened to a lot of the music. I went to the library. I found all the weirdest, I looked for the weirdest looking scores, and usually those scores are oversized. And I listened to those. Yes, right. Eventually you can open a page and then the page open up. So I listened to those things, and I feel like technically it's not hard to do these things. The hard thing is why. To find out why, and to find out, give myself a reason I had to do this. Otherwise, I could not convince myself. And so for that reason, I actually, in my freshman year, I pretty much didn't write anything. And my teacher sort of let me, he let me, and because I need the time to think about why I need to do this. So I just basically spent the first year just doing score reading on the piano or doing some kind of non-tonal counterpoint, things like that, or keyboard, like figure-based keyboard thing. And finally, after 1 year, and I found, I came to terms with it. I feel like, okay, I think I can do these things, but I can create my own reasons. And I know this is basically that's lost in translation. You know, all the reasons, the background that push those European composers to do those things does not exist in my environment. So so when I had to do this, it's completely for very different reasons. And I feel like I finally had I can sort of kind of give myself reasons to do that. So I only do, and for any kind of special technique or aleatoric writing, I need to give it meaning in order to do that. And I think I was able to do it. And I wrote in my sophomore year, I wrote a sextet, a piano kind of sextet. And so good thing is my teacher was very pleased with it. So it made sense to me, and my teacher was pleased with it, and that was good. And that was the piece that I used for my PhD application. When Marty Boykin and Eric Chasso, they told me later on, they heard that piece for the first few seconds, and they knew right away that I want to take this one. And that's the
great.
piece I wrote as a sophomore, at the end of my sophomore year.
So you came to the U.S. in 1996, is that right?
94.
94.
Right.
And where did you go to school?
I went to BU for my master's.
So whatever, I mean, you're in Taiwan. It's a 14-hour plane trip plus several more from Hong Kong or something to Taiwan. So what drew you to Boston, and in particular Boston University?
Well, I think when I was in college, I just felt a strong desire. First of all, at that time, for Taiwanese to come to the US to study was not a rare thing. I remember my first year or second year in Boston, I saw more of my high school friends than some of my American friends. Yeah. They say, you know more people here. I said, well, these are all my, New England Conservatory, Boston Conservatory, and BU. And so there are a lot of my high school or college friends. So it was not an unusual thing for people after college to go abroad for a couple of years. And that was my plan. My plan was because yes, Taiwan has a lot of people, same amount as Australia, but after all, it's still a small island. So very quickly you get to know everybody, or you get to know everybody's music. And I just feel like I need to know more. And also this is a pre-internet era. So that desire to know more pretty much means you have to physically go somewhere. And that's what I was thinking since I was in college. And so that's why, initially I was just thinking I would just come to US, study for a couple of years, get a master, and I'm gonna go back to Taiwan. That was my plan. And I picked BU for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think BU is the right environment in a very good location. Another thing is also there was a pre-internet era. I had no idea people had to send in application before the end of January. So I sent in my application in March because at that time I had to write a letter. First of all, I don't even remember how I found out different universities' admission office address, and I had to write physical letters, send it to them, and then they have to send me a thick packet of admission packet, or like each school is like this thick. So I have a whole pile of this in my room, and then you had to read through them, and my English command wasn't that great yet. And then so it was really labor intensive. And then so some school tell me, so I really want to take you, but we already gave out all our scholarship. But BU was one of the more flexible ones, so willing to take me, and I love the location, and I love, being able to study in a place like this. So that's why I would be.
And then after your master's degree, you went to Brandeis, is that right? Mm-hmm. Where you now teach, of course. And did you study with Marty Boykin, who just passed away 2 weeks ago, shortly before his 90th birthday?
Right. I mean, at Brandeis, I started with Marty for 1 year in terms of composition. And of course, I took quite a few of his analysis seminars, which are all fantastic. And
amazing. Just amazing.
It's amazing. And I think everyone, you could see in their eyes, everyone understood how lucky we were to be able to study with him. And of course, I studied with, and pretty much everyone was my teacher, Davey, Eric, and Yehudi. They were all my teachers.
So when you think back to your composition teachers, I'm wondering if there are things that they said that either you kept hearing again and again and again and again, Richard Cornell or whoever you were studying, or Marjorie Merriman or Marty Boykin or Eric Chaslow, David Rakowski, Yehudi Weiner, whoever you were studying with, they were all talking about the same issues. Was there any common topic that they were talking about, or did everybody have a different opinion of what they hoped you would be thinking about?
Actually, I think my teachers in the US, they were all pretty, for me, I don't know how if it's how they usually, but for me, they are very free roaming. Basically, they just let me do what I wanted to do. And no one actually tried to push me one way or the other. People are very generous in their comments about my music. So I pretty much just, except I remember, my first year in BU, I was working with Sam Hedrick. And I remember one thing he didn't like is because I have always had a habit, when I compose, I pretty much just write down what I hear. So when I hear, I just write it on a paper, and it already looked like a finished printed product. And once I write it down, I don't really change anything. That's at that time. And he really didn't like that. He keep trying to convince me that I should be able to change things, and he generously showed me his score, how he could have different versions on the same score, which I admire, but that's not the way I work. I pretty much do all the sketching in my head, and once I decide what it is, I write it down. And once I write it down, it's really hard to. I don't sketch it physically. I have to sketch in my head.
Well, that's probably. I'm thinking of Peter Child, with whom I had one of these interviews, and he said he does sketch a lot. He said, but nobody could read it. Nobody could interpret it. In fact, he said, I have a hard time figuring out what it was I wrote. So if the sketching is in your head, then so be it.
Right, everyone works differently, yeah.
Yes. And do you still not revise things too much?
I started to do more revision these days. In the past, I didn't. Because every piece I have written, there's always a moment I cringe when I hear it.
Yes.
I mean,
that's the way with performances I give, and
Right.
certainly pieces I write, so
Right.
I understand that.
And I know for other people, they don't find a problem with it, but it's a problem to me. And then, so there was always a moment, every single piece, there's some moment that I feel like, oh, like, and then if I have a chance, I will change it. And sometimes just cosmetic, sometimes just like for a few bars, but sometimes is you have to. But like Marty said, if you ask me if anything the teacher said, and he said, when it's finished writing, that's it, it's done, move on. And then, yeah, that's what he told me one time. I mean, but I don't know if he practiced that himself. But there are pieces that I feel like worth saving. So I started to do more revision these days when I get a chance. The problem is also because my personality, I tend to have too many ideas for one piece. So I have to keep filtering things out. And sometimes I get impatient, so I get pacing a bit too fast. I mean, it seems okay to me, but it may be too fast. I mean, so I have to so a lot of time when I do revision, it's more about diluting things, spread things, diluting ideas, spread it out, give people time to process. Because my writing had a lot of time, it tend to be very intense, and things change in a rather quick pacing, and I had to learn to find my personality.
So just giving the listener more time to process what it is, the musical thought.
Right. I mean, we are trained musicians, so we can process a lot of information, musical information, in a quick amount, very short amount of time. But it's not necessarily can be appreciated by the audience or people who first listen to it. So I had to learn to fight that.
So if you find that you have too many ideas, I'm not sure what too many ideas means, except I understand that you might feel overwhelmed and you have to get rid of ideas for that particular piece. Does that mean you never get stuck when you're writing a piece?
Oh, I do get stuck.
So what's that like, and how do you get out of it?
So I think the reason I get stuck mostly is because I don't like to repeat myself. So I think people who listen to my music, sometimes they will be surprised one piece does not sound very much like the other one, at least on the surface. But people who know me, who heard enough of it, they can still find, oh, there's Yu-Hui in it. But technically, I like to think that one piece, when I'm done with this piece, there's something I've done before. Now it's time. So next piece, I want to do something different. So each piece is something different. And so it's that new difference that I'm trying to do that got me stuck. Because when you do something, so I often tell the students that if you can write something really fast, that means you have been using the same old tools. So that's too easy for you. If you need to rethink about that, if you can write it really fast. So I don't find being able to, so I feel if I write too fast, and I will be alarmed. So I must be using the same old thing. And for instance, if I write I remember there was time I had to write incidental music, and I write, and that's not something you do a lot of technical renovation. And so I wrote like 30, 40 minutes of music in 1 week. That took no time. But when I had to write something that I like to challenge myself with every piece, then that slows me down.
So where does Mozart fit into this? The composer who, of course, we think or handle. We think of being the fastest composers that we know of anyway. Or even Schoenberg, for that matter, was a very fast composer.
Right. The way I look at it, I think they do have I think the progress is different. I'm more impatient. I want to jump with every piece. But there are people who write a lot of pieces, but the changes come through a longer period of time. I think that's fine. I think that's fine too. It's different. But I'm the kind of person, when I'm done with one thing, I need to do something different. So at least I want to have every piece that there's something challenge me that I haven't done before, because my goal is to become a composer who can write in any way that she likes. And that will be a lifelong challenge, because I don't think that day will ever come that will become someone.
Right. So I understand about getting stuck and why the reasons you think you get stuck from time to time. But what do you do to get out of that state? How do you get out of being stuck?
More deep thinking. Because I think more deep thinking and more listening. I think sometimes one gets stuck is not necessarily because technically you can't do it. It's because your mind is not there in line with your goal, with the sound you're looking for yet. So at least that's how I solve it. So I had to put my mind, because once you're really into a deep thinking, when everything works out well, that's when your mind is in a certain state. I think writers, they have that kind of state too. So you really have to get your mind to really keep thinking and thinking, and until when you get into the state, when it's finally in line with the sound, with anything you want to do, and then that I can break through that. But when my mind is not 100% in that state of mindset, then things is really slow.
So do you walk away from the score and use that time walking in the woods, or are you spending the time staring at the manuscript paper?
Oh, I will think about it when I brush my teeth. I'll think about it I'll think about it whenever I will be in a different state. So a lot of my family know, like, the more messy I look, if I look messy, I'll be in a kind of wrap myself in a blanket kind of look and a completely disheveled. That means I'm in deep thinking. I have no mind for other things.
So this is fascinating. Are there things, I asked you if there were things that your various mentors said to you that you heard again and again. I'm wondering if there are things that you, as a teacher of composition, find yourself saying again and again to all manner of students, regardless of their level of sophistication and development. I mean, aside from maybe if you're writing really fast, perhaps you aren't examining what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. One thing I often tell my music theory students is that there's no rules in music. Because a lot of time, because I want to break this myth or stereotype, because I think when it comes to music theory, when you do a voice, when you have 4-part writing, okay, no parallel fifth, no parallel octave, so they have to follow a lot of rules, and I usually tell them there are no rules in music. Those are called guidelines. And these guidelines are specific instructions for you if you want to write a certain type of music, but that's only one type of music. And so so pretty much everything is possible. So you don't need to carry those rules with you. But instead, we should focus on I call it common music behavior that exists no matter what kind of music you're dealing with. That common behavior. And that common behavior is decided by how we process sound, how we process music. So once you can get hold of how that works, you can pretty write any kind of music and really be free from burdens. And I also say a lot of time we put too much emphasis on talking about the differences between different type of music. But what we really should be talking about is the common ground shared by different type of music. Because only then you will finally get to understand the very simple principle of musical behavior. And then once you understand that musical behavior, then all the rest will be free. I like that.
What about your children? Are they musical?
They are and they aren't. So
They are and they aren't.
right. So they all have their own instrument. But every time when I talk about music, which I don't very often, they will always say, "Mommy, you need to understand, I'm not going to be a musician like you." So even though I'm not a kind of person who push them to be musician, actually I have no agenda um, um, for that. But they somehow they made it. Oh, make it very clear that I'm not going to be a musician. Just so you know. but when I say I only want you to learn one instrument, that's all I will ask. But for instance, my older daughter, I taught her piano for a few years. Now she could hear a piece and she will, out of her own motivation, I mean, kids these days in high school, they're all like very into anime and video game music. Some are quite sophisticated actually. And she will go to the piano and try to do dictation and write it down, which I never taught her dictation before, and she would try to write it down. And she actually had a perfect pitch, because if I ever sing a piece that she heard before, but if I wasn't singing the original key, she would say, "Mommy, that's the wrong key."
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I had a perfect pitch too, but
Yeah.
I'm not so. But because she had perfect pitch in a very natural way, because she couldn't tell me exactly what key that is. She just remembered that's not the pitch that she heard before.
Right.
Right.
That's a story John Heist tells about when he was a young boy in kindergarten or something, and the teacher played some tune that he knew that his mother had played, perhaps. And he went up to the teacher and said, "But all the notes are wrong," even though the notes were right. It's just they were in a different key.
Yeah, exactly. I had the same problem as a kid too. I mean, if there's sometimes the recording or that's kind of half step off, I just drive me nuts. If I'm looking at the score and listen to it, it just drives me nuts. I feel everything was wrong.
What are your children's reactions to your music?
I don't know.
We'll have to ask them.
I have to ask them. For a while, I even doubt that they understand what I do. Because I don't talk about what I do very much. They just know that I'm in front of a computer a lot. And they did go to my concert sometimes. Some of the concerts they went to. But I never have a talk about it with them. Yeah, I guess part of the reason that I didn't want them to think I'm pushing them to a certain direction.
So what has this year and a half been like for you as a teacher? Most people who are teaching composition say that it's not too terrible, even though they miss the personal interaction. But tell us of what this experience has been like for you, and as far as you can tell, for your students.
Actually, I only taught for a little bit last year from March to early May, because after that, this year I'm not teaching. And that was already prearranged before COVID started. So
it was
part
good
of me
timing.
Feel like, well, I'm not sure. I feel like I lost out on learning opportunity, because people have learned all different skill of how to do a online presentation and all how to set up different equipment, which is something I haven't needed to deal with. So people have that skill set that I don't. So I only taught for 2-3 months remotely. I think it worked out all right, because luckily I was doing an analysis seminar at the time, and also composition. And composition it was okay, but it did pain me to see in my students' eyes, even remotely, the confusion that they had. And these are grad students, and they're already a mature, relative a mature age compared to undergrad. But you can see even through the computer screen, you can see they are trying to deal with things. And I try to help out. What I will sometimes I will check on them. It's also my job as an advisor. I check on them. Are you okay? And make sure, sometimes I have Zoom session with them just to talk. So that was painful to see. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of confusion. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I understand what you're saying about not having been forced to learn all kinds of things that you might be glad to have learned. But we hope that soon you'll be back in the world of live performances, hearing your own music, hearing other people's music, working with your students face to face, and teaching all array of students your really broad and very profound vision of what music is and can be. It's your students are very lucky, and the real downside to your being on sabbatical this year is that they didn't get to work with you, but you'll be back in September.
Yes, I'm looking forward to see them actually in August, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I really look forward to seeing everybody in person. I miss that.
Yu-Hui, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you. You're very open, and I'm grateful for this time, and we're grateful for your music as well. And I wish you the very best and best of health, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person, we hope, very soon.
Same here, and thank you. I'm so happy to have this time to see you and to have this chat.
Thank you. Collage New Music performed Yu-Hui Chang's vibrant and often edgy Rhetorical Flourishes in its 2018-2019 season with the compelling soprano Tony Arnold as soloist. The work is a setting of 3 evocative poems by the very musical poet Neil Shepard, who is based in Vermont and New York City. Rhetorical Flourishes, which is about 12 minutes long, includes viola, clarinet doubling bass clarinet, percussion, and of course, soprano.